Kael'thar's massive claws gouged deep trenches into the frozen earth as he circled the human settlement for the third time that night. His iridescent scales, normally shimmering with bioluminescent patterns, had dulled to a stormy gray, the color of a Draenori father consumed by grief and rage. 3 weeks. His albino hatchlings had been missing for 3 weeks. In Draenori culture, albino offspring were considered sacred, touched by the pale moon itself. They were rare, precious, and vulnerable. Without their protective pigmentation, they couldn't regulate body temperature like normal hatchlings. They couldn't camouflage. They couldn't survive long in the wild sectors of this hostile colony world, and now his tracking instincts had led him here. To the humans. Kael'thar's lips curled back, revealing rows of crystalline teeth. Of course it would be humans. The galaxy's most unpredictable species, the ones who'd somehow clawed their way from a single dirt planet to establish colonies across 12 systems in less than a century, the ones who alternately terrified and fascinated the Galactic Council. He'd heard the stories. Humans were apex predators who domesticated other apex predators for companionship. They were weak individually but devastatingly effective in groups. They formed emotional bonds with anything, sometimes even their food before they ate it. They were walking contradictions, equal parts violence and compassion. If a human had taken his hatchlings, Kael'thar would level this entire settlement. Council laws be damned. He landed heavily outside the largest structure, his 17-foot frame casting shadows across the prefabricated walls. His nostrils flared, tasting the air. There, the unmistakable scent of his children mixed with something else. Something warm and organic and distinctly human. The building's entrance was laughably small. Kael'thar tore it apart with one swipe, ducking through the ruined doorway. His glowing eyes adjusted instantly to the interior darkness. What he found stopped him cold. In the corner of what appeared to be some kind of agricultural storage facility, surrounded by sacks of grain and hydroponic equipment, was a human female. Young, perhaps barely into adulthood by their standards. She was curled on her side on a makeshift bed of thermal blankets and cushions, and pressed against her, sleeping peacefully, were his 3 albino hatchlings. Kael'thar's breath caught in his throat. The hatchlings were glowing with health, their pale scales gleaming. They were wrapped in what looked like heated blankets, their small bodies rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of deep sleep. One had its tiny snout tucked under the human girl's chin. Another had curled its tail around her wrist. The third had sprawled across her stomach, purring softly. The human girl stirred at his entrance. Her eyes opened, dark brown, he noted, like earth soil, and focused on him with surprising calm. She didn't scream, didn't scramble away. Instead, she slowly sat up, carefully supporting the hatchling on her stomach, and placed one finger against her lips. "Shh," she whispered. "They just fell asleep an hour ago. It took forever. They kept having nightmares." Kael'thar stared. His translator implant struggled with her soft tone, but the universal gesture was clear. This human was asking him, a fully grown Draenori warrior who could tear through starship hulls, to be quiet for the sake of sleeping babies. "You," his voice came out as a rumbling growl, "you stole my children." The girl's expression shifted to one of confusion, then understanding, then something that looked almost like indignation. She carefully extracted herself from the sleeping hatchlings, tucking the thermal blankets around them with practiced gentleness, and stood to face him. She barely reached his chest plates. "Stole?" she whispered harshly, though still keeping her voice low. "I found them half frozen in the maintenance sector 3 weeks ago. They were terrified and hypothermic. One had a broken wing membrane. Another had a respiratory infection from the cold." She pointed to a corner where Kael'thar now noticed a collection of items. Medical supplies, heat lamps, specialized nutrient supplements designed for reptilian species, and what looked like handwritten care journals. "I've been treating them," she continued. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to find Draenori-specific medical information? I've been trading my entire food stipend to get the right supplements. I filed missing reports with colony security every single day. I asked every Draenori merchant who passed through if they'd lost hatchlings." Kael'thar's mind reeled. "The broken wing? Healed. See for yourself." She gestured to the smallest hatchling, and indeed Kael'thar could see the wing membrane was intact, if slightly scarred. "The respiratory infection cleared up 2 weeks ago, and I've been keeping them at 38 degrees Celsius constantly, because that's what the xenobiology database said albino Draenori need." She crossed her arms, and Kael'thar recognized the body language of a protective mother facing down a threat, even if that threat was a creature that could snap her in half. "They were dying," she said simply. "I couldn't just leave them." Something ancient and primal stirred in Kael'thar's chest. He looked at his hatchlings again, truly looked. They weren't just alive, they were thriving. Their scales had a luster he'd feared he'd never see again. They slept peacefully, without the trembling anxiety that had plagued them since birth. And this human girl, this fragile creature who should by all logic have seen his children as dangerous aliens, had instead seen helpless babies in need. Why? The word escaped him before he could stop it. Lena. He caught sight of a nameplate on her work suit. Lena Hart, Agricultural Tech. Looked at him like he'd asked why water was wet. "Because they needed help," she said. "Because they were scared and cold and alone, because—" She glanced back at the sleeping hatchlings and her expression softened impossibly. "Because when I found them, they were crying." "Did you know your species cries when they're babies?" "It's the saddest sound I've ever heard." Kael'thar's legs felt unsteady. In Draenori culture, strength was paramount. Weakness was culled. His albino hatchlings had been seen as beautiful but doomed, too fragile for a harsh universe. He'd loved them desperately but had expected to lose them. The humans saw weakness and responded with protection. They heard crying and felt compelled to comfort. No wonder the galaxy feared them. No wonder the galaxy needed them. Kael'thar struggled with words his translator barely had equivalents for. "I am in your debt, Lena Hart." She smiled and it transformed her face. "Just promise me you'll keep them warm. And for God's sake, get them some socialization. They've imprinted on me pretty hard. We might need to wean them off slowly." As if on cue, the smallest hatchling chirped in its sleep, and Lena instinctively moved to adjust its blanket. Kael'thar watched his most sacred children sleep peacefully beside the human who'd saved them, and understood something the Council had been trying to explain for years. Humans weren't dangerous because they were predators. They were dangerous because they were protectors. And there was nothing in the universe more terrifying than someone who would fight to protect something they loved.